Jimmy was cutting every link between himself and the robbery, but it had nothing to do with me.
My name is Jonathan, and I'm very happy to be in your wonderful country of Iceland and the wonderful city of Reykjavik. And I'm going to be doing a small masterclass on music supervision, music licensing, and then we're going to turn it over to Cheryl and a wonderful group of panelists, and we'll talk a little more about how it relates specifically to the music industry here in Iceland, and then we'll be getting into Q&A after that. My background is, I guess, a music entrepreneur. I went to university in New York City at New York University and studied business, but I spent all my free time at uni working at the college radio station, working, putting on concerts, working in journalism in terms of music reviews. And so my lesson sort of one in terms of preparation in music supervision, music licensing, I call it like pimp your school. And there's a lot of opportunities in institutions, and it will pass you by if you don't participate and get involved. And so you have to sort of find and attack and get involved. And that led me to DJing in New York City, besides being actually on the college radio station. And I started to learn the basics of the music industry at that point. From there, I started to throw parties, do events, and that leads me to the second lesson, which is networking. It's great to have a lot of followers. It's great to have a high social media activity, but it's the quality relationships that are vital in terms of networking. And so don't just meet someone and add them as a friend or follow them. It's more following up with them, figuring out the connection, and trying to turn it into actual productivity at that point in time. And then at that point, as a 19-year-old, I started a hip-hop record label. And I started to throw more parties and kind of took a whole DIY approach. And that's sort of lesson 3, is DIY. Don't wait for someone to hire you. Go out, get internships, work for people you respect, people that you would like to follow in their footsteps, and put out records, manage artists that you like, go out and perform, go out and do things. It's all about DIY, and in today's world, it's even easier than ever to sort of do DIY. My first job was after graduate school, and I was a director of A&R at Island Records, and my bosses that I worked directly for were Chris Blackwell, who was the founder of the label, and Hugo Burnham, who was the drummer for the Gang of Four, and Kevin Patrick, who was the manager of a seminal sort of garage punk band called The Cramps. And it was an amazing education in terms of learning from some pretty experienced people. And then after that job, I went on to work for the founder of Profile Records, known for discovering and signing Run DMC. And we had a BMG record company, and I was an A&R director there. And I started to put together compilation albums. So I had a vast knowledge of music, but now I was asked to sort of theme them. And we did all sorts of party and dance and strip music and all these different compilations. And I started to utilize and understand not just the creativity of A&R, which is like, okay, great, I know a playlist, or I know music of that might be popular at a strip club, or music that might be popular at a soccer match. But now I started to have to get the rights to the music, and that's when I started to learn about licensing. And that experience made me very valuable in the music industry because I was creative and I had all these great ideas, but I also understood how to get the rights to the music itself. And from there, I end up starting my own company. And for 15 years, I've had a company called Finegold Music. And it started off doing music licensing, which is the representation of music like many of you here, and trying to sell that into Hollywood and into Madison Avenue as far as video games, movie trailers, advertisements, TV shows, and movies, and more recently podcasts. And I started to represent the music that was in my vinyl crates, and going through it, and whatever was not a company that was not a major company, meaning Sony or Warner Brothers or Universal, I was starting to just call them and say, hey, do you have anyone that's representing you on Madison Avenue and in Hollywood? And people were like, what are you talking about? And they really didn't understand synchronization or licensing. And so they were like, yeah, you can make me more money. And I said, not only can I make you more money, but it's also marketing for your music. And so there I started to represent lots of great music, and I started to build a portfolio of a variety of music from many countries, from many eras, many genres. And we started to have success with Nike and the NFL and 2 different commercials for Apple and tons and tons of major movies and big, huge TV shows. And I realized that a key to my success was thinking globally and thinking for not just American music and thinking out of the box and thinking about all different eras. And what I was doing was marketing the music to the music supervisors who were making the choices. And when you could deliver it in a very palatable and easy to use way, which we'll get into later on, we had a very high success rate. And then around 5 years ago, someone said, you have all this great music you're representing. I have a small movie that I'm producing and directing. Could you be my music supervisor? And not only was I, like most people that said, sure, I can music supervise, I kind of understood the business behind it. And so then I started a new area of the company, which was actually doing music supervision myself. And my forte is documentaries and indie features, pretty much. And I'm currently working right now on a documentary called El Gran Feove, and it's about a famous Cuban musician, and the director for the project that I'm working with day-to-day is Matt Dillon. And so that's been a pretty cool project for me as a music supervisor. And hopefully we'll be in a major film festival later this year. So what is music supervision? Does anyone know? Raise their hand. Okay, good. So the music supervision, so there was a music supervisor who's very well known. His name is P.J. Bloom, and he's a buddy of mine. And there was a quote that I once read that I thought was fabulous. And the quote was, I don't tell the cinematographer what lens to use, but everyone seems to think that they know the right song to choose. And that's not the case. You have to leave it up to people who are experts in music. So it's not just knowing a great song or having a vast knowledge of music. There is a variety of things that go into the job, and that are not as sexy and glamorous as just picking out music. I thought it was kind of interesting, and I didn't realize this, but as everyone was sitting, you saw some famous songs in famous scenes or famous movies. And what I realized is, at that time, which a lot of these are from the 80s, there was probably no music supervision credit at all in these movies. They were in most cases John Hughes and Martin Scorsese and people that were the directors that made the choices, that said, let's use this song. And so this business of being a music supervisor, music supervision, is very new. I would say, I kind of remember maybe less than zero being sort of one of the earlier films in the late 80s that started to actually credit someone who is a music supervisor. But a lot of the famous directors over the years have just sort of made their own choices, and then it's left up to a sort of legal person who's doing clearances for photos or doing other clearances to kind of get the rights to the music. So I think why is it crucial for a band to have a synchronization? So just to backstep, a synchronization would be a placement, having your song in a movie or in a TV show or used in an advertisement. And so there's two major pluses to having one of your songs used in a synchronization. Does anyone know what the obvious one is?
Exposure?
Exposure. Marketing. It's huge for you to be able to tweet, for you to be able to tell people, hey, I had a song in, in a big motion picture or even in a small movie. It offers a lot. And it's not just the ability to tell people, it's also the views that you're going to get. People that watch the show, that see the movie. A lot of times what people do is Shazam it. And they're like, what is that song? There's also a website that's popular in America called TuneFind. And I'm not sure if anyone's heard of it, but that's where you can go to and you can see the names of all the songs that appeared on a particular TV show or movie. And there's also something similar called iSpot for advertising as well. So that's the first plus for it, but the second plus is financially. Music fees can be massive. They can also be very small. They could be $100 or $500 or $1,000. But a major motion picture with a very popular song can be a $100,000 fee. A major popular song for a bigger TV show could be $40,000, give or take. But there's also plenty of TV shows that have budgets of $500 a song or $1,000 a song. And advertisement campaigns could be a few $1,000s to $1 million. It just depends. A lot of major artists like the Led Zeppelins and stuff get probably $1 million. And it's sort of interesting and ironic because, say, 20, 25 years ago, it was sort of not cool to put your song in a commercial. It was like not very hip at all. And now, and not just now, but in the last, say, 10 years or so, it's been led by cool bands like Vampire Weekend or the Black Keys. Very credible and hip bands, and they are doing multiple ads. And they're not just doing ads for like cool electric cars. They're doing ads for like Toyota or, Victoria's Secret was a big one that Vampire Weekend did. So some might consider that in today's market a sellout, but no longer is that the case. And a big reason for that is with the popularity of file sharing, the record industry, from the sense of record sales, really crashed. And the bands and record labels were looking for other forms of compensation. And so what did they do? They went on tour more, they sold more merchandise, and then lastly, they tried to get syncs. And that helped make up the difference for the lack of record sales. So we'll see now with streaming being so popular, maybe things will change. We'll see. So, difference between a composer and a music supervisor. Sometimes composers will kind of do a little bit of supervision, but they're sort of, most of the time, so proud, they won't say, you know what, a song might go better here than a composition. But early on, composers were making choices and sort of saying, hey, or the director would make the choice and the composer would say, well, let me come up with some ideas for you. And but there's a big difference that most of you, I'm sure, know, that composers are typically writing score and recording it and orchestrating it, and music supervisors are actually, in most cases, choosing songs and working with the directors on an actual song choice. So there might be a montage of Sarah Jessica Parker looking to buy a wedding dress, and they're going to play some sort of 70s love song as opposed to scoring it. And so that's sort of a good example. One of my favorite hybrids of it is often at the end of a movie when you have your end titles. There'll often be a song will come on to kind of end the movie, so you get up and leave the theater in hopefully in a feel-good or a contemplative way, and then halfway during the credits, then some of the score will come back in from the original part of the movie itself, and it kind of gives you sort of a 1-2 punch. But you often either don't realize it because you've left the theater during the credits, or if you do stay like me, then it's usually a smooth transition right into it, and it's great. But always stay to the end. You have to sort of recognize all the hard work, and sometimes at the way end of it, directors will kind of put something kind of cool and funny, or some outtakes, or they'll tell you about version 2 that's coming or something, so don't miss the credits. When do you hire a music supervisor is a question that comes up a lot, and that's geared a lot towards the producers and directors here. Well, you like to be hired as a music supervisor early. You like to be hired when the script has actually been given, so you could read through it and you can point out with the director some areas that you think will benefit from score versus benefiting from an actual song. And then you get involved with actually helping hire the composer as well. And you sort of have a stable, and the director will give you a vision, or the director might give you his favorite movies or his favorite composers, and then a lot of it's always based, of course, on budget. And you can't, have John Williams every time. And people like John Williams are booked years and years ahead of time, and they're already booked for Spielberg's Volume 4 of some movie through like 2025. And the fees that people at that level get are $1 million plus. And there's a lot that goes into sort of compensation, and that could involve percentages, and there's also a big discussion about ownership as well, but we can get into that another time. But oftentimes we get hired once there's been a rough cut assembled, and we're brought in late, and that's not good because then it's more difficult to deliver the director's goals. And of course the director is on budget and is already off the budget, so you have to perform miracles, and it makes it quite challenging. So the earlier we're hired, the better it can be. And we're often hired early only when there's on-camera. So an on-camera scene might be when the protagonist is singing in the shower, for instance, and the director wants to make sure that he or she shoots the person singing it itself. And so you see the words, and so you want to get the rights ahead of time because you don't want to shoot that and waste money. Most smart directors and supervisors will shoot it in different ways. So maybe from behind or other angles, so you could, if for some reason you can't get the clearance rights, you still haven't wasted your shot that day. So the earlier the better we're hired. So what does a music supervisor do? So I'll break the ideas down, but we spot, we strategize, we make budgets, we do clearances, we make the cue sheets, we do the final paperwork, and then if we're lucky, there's a soundtrack. And that's sort of the final step, the icing on the cake. So, spot. When you spot a film, it's often I kind of mentioned it earlier, you're looking at the rough cut, and you're sitting with the director and perhaps some other key people, perhaps with the composer, and you're deciding on what areas and what scenes could be helped with music. And sometimes your spot will change from that moment to what happens in the end, because you'll say, oh, let's try score here, and then the composer will write something and then you'll realize it's not working, or vice versa. So the spotting session is a pretty important one. Then you strategize. You review budgets. You determine, that's kind of a good time where the music super might say, well, we have a huge budget. Let's only do songs of AC/DC. Let's do something really weird. Or let's do a complete juxtaposition when every time you think there should be a sobby, depressing ballad, let's make it an uplifting love song. So you might kind of try to do something a little weird and different and suggest some curveballs. Most of the time, the director has a vision and knows, I want to use the Simple Minds, don't you forget about me, or he or she has this sort of idea, or often the writer who wrote the script, it will be in the script already, a specific song. And they all want Led Zeppelin, Stairway to Heaven, or they all want some Prince song, or Steppenwolf Magic Carpet Ride when there's some sort of driving scene. They all kind of have these sort of very proverbial visions. And that's where the music supervisor says, wait, your budget is only this, so I'm not so sure we can deliver that. So clearances. This is one of the most challenging parts of a music supervisor's job. I'll give you a couple of quick stories. So I was working on a documentary that's not out yet. It's been in a bunch of festivals, and it's called Yo Soy Mi Voy, I Am Leaving, it's called. And it's about an immigrant in Brooklyn who is trying to decide if he should go home to see the son that he's never really seen in Mexico. And he's trying to determine, in today's sort of Trump era in America, will he be able to get back in the country or not? And should he go see his son? And he's been sending a lot of his money back to his family in Mexico. So the director wanted the clash, should I stay or should I go, to end the movie. And I take on everything as a challenge. And something that the directors here should understand, that not everything is expensive. And so we approached the Clash's music publishing company, which is Universal Music in the States. And they said, okay, write us a synopsis of the scene and give us some serious details, and even show us the footage of what it's going to be, and we'll pass it on to some of the living band members and to the estate for a review. And a band like The Clash is big enough and they're successful enough where it's not always about the money, it's about something that might be interesting to them. And they were sort of piqued by what was happening. They were very curious about it. And so the response came back of, this sounds very interesting, send us an official request. And then my director decides, hold on, no, we want to record the song and in Spanish, and we want to use it. So then I'm like, okay, you guys are really getting your bang for your buck with my work. So I have to go back and again kind of go through the process again. And then it comes back to me that The band is still intrigued. It's really the songwriters of that song, which I think it was Mick Jones and Joe Strummer. The band's intrigued. Can you send us the actual song? Which hadn't been made yet. So luckily the director had a connection to an amazing Mexican female singer whose husband owned a studio. And so they produced the demo. It sounded awesome. And that's when I get involved. Like, I'll say, okay, cut it and send it to me. I want to hear it. Like, I need to make sure from an A&R standpoint that the quality is there, because it would be embarrassing to mix the record and start to edit it and do all these things. So it was excellent. I told them to go ahead and mix it. They mixed it. The mix sounded great. Then they cut it to the actual scene. And then we sent that in. And lo and behold, 2 weeks later, they said, okay, we approve this. Now, our budget was probably around $1,000 for the song, maybe $2,000, which is nothing. But it's a documentary, and the record company and the publishers understand this, and so they are flexible. And again, the Clash sort of comes from a very sort of punk rock, political standpoint, and they were very intrigued by the message that the documentary had to say. And so this is jumping over hoops galore. And it's not always like that. But that is a job of what a music supervisor does. And the director, of course, calls every day and says, what's the update, what's the update? And you're just like, slow down. Like, it's not going to happen that quickly. It takes time. So it's a reason why to sort of get ahead of the curve and get us involved early. And that is sort of that's one of the things we do as a music supervisor. It's not always that challenging. Sometimes you just send the request and they approve it, and it's fine. A lot of it depends on the artist. Some artists in their contracts have approval rights. Some won't do, alcohol, or they have certain restrictions. Advertising usually requires approvals, and oftentimes the record companies or the bands themselves want to at least know what's happening. But a funny example, we did an Apple commercial for a band that some of you might know called Sleigh Bells that we represent, and Apple wouldn't tell us what the product was. They said, nope, sorry. And then sometimes, the band will say, well, we want to watch the spot. And some companies, some ad agencies will send it to you. Apple's like, no, take it or leave it, basically. And so we had no idea what it was. We had a description of how the song was used, so we knew it wasn't like something that was going to be bad or controversial. And it's Apple, and the budgets are sometimes strong. In this case, it was. And we knew the marketing would be incredible. And so I was in touch with Apple like on an hourly basis practically, because I didn't want the band to see it until I was the one that broke the news. And so they called me on a Monday, and they're like, it's going to go in 1 hour on NFL football. Get ready. And so I immediately called the manager and was like, okay, it's happening, blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, the next question from the manager is, when are we going to get paid? Now, getting paid in our industry, don't expect it. I mean, you will get paid. You will get paid in licensing and in sync licensing, but it could take months. I still have outstanding invoices that are more than a year old. And I know that it will get done, but it's just that the way production is and how slow it is, you can't force the issue. And when you do, you can jeopardize the relationship you have with that particular music supervisor. And they don't want to hear from you as a band or a record company every day of what's going on with my payment. It's like, it ran, you have a contract, it's signed, you'll get paid, you got to be patient. And eventually it will come through, and you'll get paid. So patience is totally important. So typical rights that are sought out, and a couple of sort of buzzwords to understand, and this is sort of geared towards the directors. And it's good for the musicians and the record labels to know as well. But typically there is term, So the term is basically going to be the length of the agreement. And most of the time in synchronization, it's perpetuity, meaning forever. Territory is next, and most of the time it's global or it's a worldwide deal. If it's advertising, it can be sort of like geo-locked from a standpoint that media would broadcast it only in that country, but internet might be for the world. The rights themselves is pretty big. Most of the time, people like to have what they call all media, which means we can run this show on all media, internet, movie theaters, TV, it can go anywhere. And the sort of, the big part of that is theatrical. So sometimes if people don't have budgets, they might limit it and say, you can have all media except for the theaters. And then if you want the theaters, you have to pay extra. And then another sort of popular media right is festivals only, meaning you only have 1 or 2 years to use the song, and it's only for festivals. So it could play at Stockfish, it could play at the Toronto Film Festival or in Cannes, but beyond that, it can't go on to TV, it can't go into regular theaters beyond the festivals until you get that right. Because sometimes you don't have the distribution yet at that point. So it's also quite important on a request that you understand how your song is used. And that affects the value of that deal. So for instance, a song that is 10 seconds versus a song that is full use, or 3 minutes. That plays one role as far as the fees go. Another is, how is the song actually used? Is it a background where a car is driving in the streets of a Latin neighborhood in New York and a salsa record comes on in the background, almost like it's coming out of someone's apartment building? Versus Sarah Jessica Parker is going to be dancing while she tries on 10 different wedding gowns to the Chi-Lites' Oh Girl. And that costs a lot more because it's what we call, it's a montage use, it's featured. Or an on-camera use where someone is actually singing the song, or an end title, or an opening title. Those have more value. And that means the director really wants something. Oftentimes, a background use, it's not something that people are in love with in terms of, or married to in terms of the director. Oftentimes, it can be swapped out. If you can't comply with the fees, or you're just being challenging and difficult, or there's questions about the rights, they just move on to something else. It's 10 seconds, it's 15 seconds, it's a minute, but it's something that's incidental. It's not that vital. But if it's a montage, if it's a title, you know, the directors put thought into it, or the advertising agencies put a lot of thought into it, and it's something that they really want, and you have more leverage, and you should be paid accordingly. There's a term that's really important, and it's called Most Favored Nations, also known as MFN. And Most Favored Nations sort of means, as say the publisher of the song, I want to be paid what the master owner is going to be paid. It sort of means, if you're on budget and your project is super, super limited and you only can pay me $500 or 10,000 kronas, then that's okay, but everyone needs to be paid the same amount. I don't want to be treated unfairly. So that's called Most Favored Nations. So you often would ask for that if they're interested in your song and someone says, I don't really have a lot of money, I can only afford this amount. So then you'll say, well, can I be paid equal to everyone else in the project? And they might say no. But you might say, can I be paid equal to everyone else in the project with a similar usage? You know, I don't agree that I can be paid the same as what a montage or a title song might be. But if it's a background incidental use, then we all want to be paid the same amount. So that's an important term to understand. The other important sort of definition or the understanding of a right is you must have two rights to use a song in a visual, meaning ads, video games, trailers, movies, TV. And that's the master right and the publishing right. They're two separate things. If you, as an artist, cover a Beatles song, you are only the owner of the master. You're not the owner of the publishing. That's owned by the publisher, Sony, ATV, whoever it might be. If you wrote the song and you recorded the master, then you own the publishing and the master itself. Does that make sense to everyone? So both rights need to be secured in order for it to be used in a movie or in a TV show. In other words, if you make an amazing cover of a Led Zeppelin song, you legally can sell that. You can put that on iTunes and you can stream that on Apple Music and Spotify, no problem at all. But if you get asked to put that song into a movie, you can say yes till the cows come home, but if the publisher hasn't agreed to it, then the song cannot be used. You can still sell it traditionally, but you cannot allow it for synchronization because both parties have to approve it. Does that make sense? It's very complicated. Music publishing is complicated in general. Some common misconceptions of music supervision. Number one, that music supervisors are the final decision makers. They are not. There's often a variety of people that make those final decisions. In a TV show, it's a showrunner. In a movie, it could be the director or directors. In an advertising campaign, the music supervisor can just provide ideas, and it's often the client itself, whether it's Pepsi or whether it's Wonder Bread or General Electric for light bulbs. Their marketing people often will make the final decision. The music supers can just get the music and send it over based on the visual that's been presented or the visual that they're going to be recording. Another interesting thing is that music supervisors only select or work with music that they love. That's definitely not the case. We have a job to do, and there's plenty of, I love all music, but it doesn't mean it's my favorite when I'm sending something in or I'm trying to push for something. Music, and the other sort of misnomer is that clearances are easy, and they're not. They're very difficult, especially with bigger named artists, and they're also challenging for foreign music. You know, when the director wants a obscure Brazilian song and the only thing that he or she can send you is a YouTube link, and you have like nothing to go on, and when you Shazam it, nothing comes up. And so then you're basically you're like a private eye. You're sending the song off to a Brazilian and you're asking them if they know, and then they're sending it to their grandmother, and their grandmother's listening and maybe sort of has an idea, and then you're sending it to like a musicologist in Brazil or some sort of magazine or a famous journalist, and you're trying to track it down. So we play sleuth sometimes. So I think before we jump into the panel, I think one of the things that people probably want to know is how to get your music into, how do you get your music synchronized, right? So there are a variety of ways. First, have your music ready. Have it prepared to where it's sort of delivered on a silver platter, meaning have instrumental mixes of everything. Your producers should have the stems on hand. Make sure that all your music is properly tagged with metadata. Contact emails, the name of the song, the year it was released. Make sure that you have all this detail. Make sure the quality of the file, which typically right now we want 320-bit MP3s. We don't want WAV files. We don't want music attached to an email. We often want a link where you can stream it and then download it if you want. Now, there are, I've estimated there to be around 1,200 music supervisors in the world, and there's probably a few hundred that actually work on a consistent basis. It's challenging to develop relationships with them, just to be candid. I'd say 3/4 of the time, they're just going into their own catalogs, their own libraries, and their own iTunes setups, and they're listening and they're coming up with ideas based on what they have already, based on their knowledge, and based on what the director or showrunner might want. Then they might send out what we call a search. And so that's usually a last case scenario. And that search goes out to existing record companies that they have established relationships with. That search goes out to music licensing people like myself. And we are relied upon to deliver ideas to them. They know that when they seek a Chinese Mandarin hip-hop record, that we're not going to send them a Taiwanese Mandarin hip-hop record, or that we're not going to just send them a hip-hop record that we think is really important and that we like. They know that when they say that it needs to be from 1982 to 1984, we're not going to send them something from 1986. And so we have long-term established relationships where we can make their job easier and we can not waste their time. Music supervisors, the art has changed. There is an art to it in which there are supervisors who anally work night and day to find the perfect song for the perfect scene and the perfect scenario. And then there are others that it's a job. And if the director wants this, or there's an idea for a rock and roll song or a cool, dreamy song that sounds like Bjork, they do it, they get it done, and they move on. They don't really overanalyze the situation, and it's a job, and they just want to check it off because they're doing 20 episodes of a TV show, and it's a music-intensive show that has 7 songs an episode, and they're working every day nonstop. And so every time they can kind of get one song done on that series, it's one song less that they have to deal with, and oftentimes it goes down to the wire. So when there's complications, it throws everyone off. And there are a lot of complications. They can't locate a writer on a song. The song wasn't properly registered. So what you all can do is, if there's multiple writers, make sure you have all of their names. Make sure you have the society or the publishing company or that they're affiliated with. You can't deliver that information after the fact. When someone calls you and says, we really do like this song, we want to use it, can you send us over a WAV file and send us over the writers' names and the splits? The splits meaning the percentages of who wrote what, which should add up to 100. You can't say, well, I'll get back to you next week. It's like, no, they need it by the morning kind of thing. And if not, there's 10 other songs that the director kind of liked, and they'll just move on to the next one. So it's a very fast-paced business, and you need, really accurate information, and you really need to deliver sort of what's expected or what the standard is. So figure out where your music fits in. tried to contact some of those music supers directly. It's a long process. Try to link up with a sync licensing agency like myself, and we represent labels and bands throughout the world, and we have everything categorized. So when a super calls me and says, hey, we're on the mix stage right now and a song just fell out because we just found out that there was a sample in it or there's a problem with the union on the song, can you send us over something that is 122 beats per minute that has flute and cowbell in it, and it needs to have lyrics about breakup, and we need it in an hour. Like, we go through our systems and we have everything labeled and tagged and we know what to send them. And if I send them songs without a flute or without a cowbell or at the wrong tempo or the wrong year, they'll write me back and say, dude, like, did you not read what I just wrote you? Like, they'll kind of call you out on it. And if they call you out enough on it, then they won't send you the search. So it's important to have all your ducks lined up and to understand everything. What are they looking for in supervision, you know, in syncs? I mean, they're looking for groundbreaking music sometimes, cool, interesting, things that are different. They most likely are looking for music in English or instrumentals. Spanish has become quite popular lately. French definitely comes in. I would say that Icelandic language for films not made in Iceland is probably difficult. So if you are an Icelandic artist and you're singing in Icelandic, maybe run a vocal in English if you can, and that can be what we call like your sync mix. And you can just work on that for pitching it for synchronization. Or run an instrumental mix and play the vocal melody with an instrument. Does that make sense? And then you have a full-on instrumental. You don't have a sort of thin instrumental that says, hey, where's the vocal? You know, and play it with a flute or a good lead guitar or something like that. That's also a cool way to go about it. So I think it's time to introduce the lovely and talented Cheryl from the organization
Iceland Music, which most of you would know as UTON, Útflutningsskrifstofa Íslenskra tónlistar. And here with me today I have Gudrun Björk, CEO of STEF, who is our collection society. Musicians here, if you're not already registered to STEF, you should be. Make sure that you're getting your money where your money is due. And Peter, who has been working for a long time in a wonderful range of TV and commercials and all sorts of really good sync stuff. So yeah. To begin with, thank you for that wonderful masterclass and speech, Jonathan. That was really, really insightful. And I think it's fair to say that all of us here today, you know, we've had some level of experience working with supervision, working with sync, and just generally looking at the interaction and the interplay between music and visuals. So why don't we start off by asking Gudrun about, in your work with the Collection Society, exactly how important is the importance of the PRO. If you're in the UK, you would call it PRO. Everywhere in the world, you would call it Collection Society. What is the role of that in making sure that musicians get what they're worth?
Thank you, Cheryl. It's really nice to be here, although we get a stream of really cold wind right here,
It's very
back up
Icelandic.
our necks. So I'm the CEO of STEF, which is the Icelandic Collecting Society. And we just see it from our distributions every year that money coming from film and TV is getting more and more important for our members. So, you know, as Jonathan explained, you know, what happened when there was no more records to be sold, the money went into sync. So a member of ours who has either written a score or has some pre-released music in a film or a TV show that will, be aired in a lot of countries in the world. He should be able to not only get the sync fee from the music supervisor or from the production, but he should also get what you call the secondary income or the back end income. That is the income from the public performance of the film or the TV show in television stations and movie theaters around the world. And also from WOD services and subscription services as well. So I think that's also important to think about when you are contemplating if or not you should actually sync this particular song to this particular scene in a movie. Not only how much is the upfront fee, but also how likely it is that this movie will be shown in a lot of countries and its ability to actually produce for you later on, maybe even through the years, some secondary income. And just so while I have the microphone, I'm using the opportunity also to stress that in order for that to happen, the production company must turn in a so-called cue sheet, which Peter is a master in making those. So if you want to know more about those, just call him up and he will give you a private lesson in making. So it's important that not only that the production companies know how to make a cue sheet and that they are actually turned into the collection societies, but you as maybe writer of the score, or if you have any pre-existing music, that you kind of make sure that those cue sheets have been turned in, because without them there won't be a match with our databases when those films or TV shows have been aired, and the music and the money will not go to you. I think this will go for now, but I have one more point which I want to make later on if there's time.
A musician to most effectively get noticed by a music supervisor? I know you mentioned before that one of the primary ways is that you have to make sure that all your music is properly tagged properly. So what does that really mean, meta tagging? And how can a musician use that to the best of their advantage?
So it's the metadata that's actually in an MP3, and it has all this area for information and for contact details and websites, and it's important that it's detailed, because sometimes we get a great song and it's not labeled and we don't know how to get to the right people. And then when you're sending metadata songs to music supervisors for shows, then you want to tag it with themes like haunted or eerie or dreamy or death, and then I also like to tag my music with the names of bands it sounds like, or for fans of Drake, for fans of Kanye, just to kind of get an understanding. And it's not that people don't have time to listen themselves, and it's not that, it's for ease. And also, you as the creative person, you know your music more than anyone, and you know that like people that like Radiohead also like your band, so I think that that's quite helpful in that sense.
Right, so Peter, you've been working on a lot of really great projects. You've been working a lot on advertisements primarily. How did you wind up coming into that field? I know it's probably a big story.
It's a good question. I'll give you the short answer. I had a film company. I started out in music, then I learned filmmaking, and I had a film company, and I was directing commercials myself. And we had one guy who would do, music for commercials, and then you had bands, and like Jonathan mentioned before, selling out to commercials wasn't cool then. So you were practically begging or you knew the guys, right? Then I got stiff bored of directing commercials. And I really wanted to get back to music. So how can I make a living? And the first thing I thought of was, well, I work with the agencies. They're all my friends. I tell them I'm doing something different for them. And since I tried my hardest as a filmmaker, they gave me the benefit of the doubt, and it went down from there. Another thing that I did is I went to 5 or 6 musicians that I liked, because I knew I couldn't cater to everything that came in by myself.
Right.
So I would find people who had different styles, and I would come to them, much like Jonathan said before. Is it okay if I make you money? Nothing exclusive, no retainer, but can I present your work and your talent to the people I'm engaged with? And most of them said yes, not all, which is another story, because there was always the suspicion, and I think it was a suspicion that I was coming in and trying to take something of theirs. Some people were really suspicious when I went out, this idiot that came from the film business where you don't do anything alone. 2 musicians who actually can do stuff alone. So we built up a company around this, and for a while, for a while we concentrated on this, and then I went more into scoring and instrumental music, and I sort of love doing different kinds of jobs. So I happily, when I finish a score, I love doing a couple of commercials or planetarium or ringtone or whatever comes up, because I like the variety of stuff and styles and everything. That's challenging, and that's what makes it fun coming to work, which is what I love. That was the story of that.
Floor is still open for questions if anyone has any.
Yes. All right.
There we go. Let's
All
go.
right.
Okay, so my question is for both of you. If there are songwriters or composers out there that are not here, how would they reach out to you, or how do they get in contact with you? I'm assuming you have a website, but sometimes you're not certain if you get answered or if you get heard.
Sure.
Right, so for the benefit of the room, the question is, how does a musician get in touch with someone who wants to get their music used? Is that correct?
Yes.
So as a company, you can go to our website specifically, which is finegoldmusic.com, and you can submit your music, and usually it ends up with like a SoundCloud link that we will listen to internally, and you can sort of describe your scenario in that note. And weekly we go through music and we see what's interesting. And usually we'll write people back, and you can reference that you've met me here. That's super helpful. And I would say that what do people, I mean, I kind of mentioned it earlier, but people seek something that, it's sort of like a disparity. Some people want the coolest, latest, greatest thing that's just like super edgy and unique and different. And then some people just want like the thing that sounds like everything else that exists. And so it kind of like goes back and forth like a ping pong ball. And whatever might be like hot at that moment, everyone is like, oh my God, we need songs that sound like Portugal the Man. Oh my God, it's got to be like that vibe. Like it has a certain sound, especially in the ad world. They get very caught up in like, first it was Vampire Weekend, then it went to the Black Keys, and then recently, in the last like 2 years, it's been Portugal the Man. Everyone's talking about it. Or it's that song in the Levi's commercial, that South African song, forgetting the name of it.
Yeah.
And it's a female singer, and it's awesome, and everyone kind of wants that vibe. And then Sophie Tucker was another sort of big electro artist that has had a lot of ads, and that everyone kind of wants to mimic. Yeah, so that's what I think you should do, and I'm happy to kind of take a listen to it. But I think where it becomes difficult for us is, and we get a lot of these, where someone says, I'm a composer, and they send a SoundCloud link to compositions It's very hard to evaluate that because it's usually not live. And so what I'll often say to them is, the quality sounds great, but why don't you create some hybrids for me? Why don't you make hip hop beats with classical, or take, a different approach and combine things? And that might be something that would attract me. I can't review another person from Berkeley's music as a composer really and understand it because it's very similar to me, and I see it more big picture because I'm not a composer myself.
I get a lot of searches for the Icelandic sound from abroad. Well, we don't know what it is, but the searches come in. So basically, what happened with us is that we decided everybody in my original group sort of went their own way. Some are touring, doing their own things, and I decided that I wanted to cut out the management part of having a team into concentrating on my own work. But I get called a lot from people who have these same questions, and I answer them all really happily and help out in any way that I can, because what we need in our business, in the Icelandic music business, is people who want to participate, who want to do good music, because what's in all our best interest is to make a bigger cake instead of fighting for the slices. There are technical things that people want to. Jonathan mentioned the biggest ones you make. If you want to write to commercials, take a commercial and write to it, because there is an arch that has to happen in a commercial. You start out slowly. You have to be building up all the time. Then you have to dead stop and leave something for the voiceover and so on. So there is I don't know if I should call it art. There is a technique. There's a craft to writing to commercials that you can train and you can learn. You take a car commercial you like, you put it on your screen. I write a lot of science fiction based music, and what I do is I take gameplay from really great games and I put them on my screen. I write music to that. Another thing that Jonathan mentioned is, if you send me something and say I'm a composer, if you write to picture, show us the picture as well, because there's the context of what you write gives power to what's on the picture, and that's where the magic happens. The music without picture might be great, but film music isn't big or melodic most of the time. It's a score, we're building emotions to serve the picture. So if you can do that to a picture. That's the quality people are looking for when they're looking for a composer. It's not how great you make a composition that sounds really great, but until you marry that with a story and you marry that with a visual situation, you haven't proven that you can write to picture.
I just wanted to add to this that I think a great way for musicians to meet supervisors is actually to attend the workshops that Stef and Uton have been doing once a year for the last 5 years. We've invited some music supervisors, mainly from LA, but some also from other countries as well. And LA is not a country. Yeah, LA and other countries. And
it's quite fitting, though.
And what we have given the Icelandic musicians there is an opportunity to meet those music supervisors in person, and we kind of forced them to actually listen to bits of their songs. You know, they can't run away. They're in the room, and everybody will listen to the songs together. Some pieces of it, and gives maybe some input into if they would see that would fit into something or not, or give some constructive criticism on it. And then obviously afterwards is time to, exchange cards or whatever. And we've actually seen quite many contracts coming out of this. And so I'm wondering if we should invite Jonathan again to Iceland to come.
There we go.
Come to that.
Book my ticket now.
And it's getting more and more known. I think these workshops Last year we had over 50 applications, and we could choose from those 20, which we thought were kind of composers that were export ready, that had everything, got some repertoire and got some experience and making music that would maybe be more fitting to cinematographic or not.
So we have a question back there.
Hello, hello.
Oh, we got a microphone.
There you go.
I was just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more about the rights, the master rights and the publishing rights, and tell us a little more about it. I've licensed 2 songs from fairly known bands, and it was such a complicated situation. I think in one case the band owned neither, and it was with some other companies, but the band helped us because they wanted this to happen.
Sure. So, thank you for your question. I mean, that's why you hire a music supervisor, because we, for the most part, have relationships with record companies, with bands, with publishing companies. We understand the ins and outs, and then we work on your behalf to get you your music at the best price possible. Now, if you're doing it on your own, it's not something that we don't recommend it, because you don't have necessarily the right contracts, you don't understand the right verbiage for everything, and like you see, it was quite difficult. But when you do, I would say you need to contract with a lawyer. That's probably the first thing in terms of getting the paperwork properly done. And you want to make sure you have the right rights. Typically, you want all media rights. You want your rights to be in perpetuity, which is forever. And you want it to be a universal, as far as the territory, you want it to be global or for the world or for the universe. Those are some of the basics that you need. It becomes, and I think that the point I was making earlier about the movies we were watching was that the music supervision business is in its infancy here in Iceland, and it appears that there are really no music supervisors, and directors are calling bands or calling each other and getting recommendations or putting their favorite bands, which are very good and very credible. And so what they're not realizing is you can get American music or British music or Australian bands, big ones. For low-budget projects, for documentaries, we've cleared Paul Simon, The Clash, Bob Dylan, and we've cleared them all for a few $1,000s or less sometimes even. If it's a project that those artists find interesting and worthy, then they're apt to do it. And there are bands that are expensive no matter what. We're working right now on the Alabama Shakes, and we're doing it for probably $7,500, which is not a lot for a big band like that. So it just depends. But that's why you hire us, because I know the ins and outs of songs, artists, record labels, and know where the rights are, and we try not to take no for an answer. If we had more time, I would tell you about this great story about a rabbi and what I had to do to get a clearance, and maybe I'll tell it later. Did that answer your question, by the way?
Yeah, well,
It's all out there. Actually, there are very informative sites on the web where you can, because this is a long study, it is really complicated, maybe more complicated than we can go through in a short time like this. But there are sites where you can actually read up on the difference of the rights and who usually owns them if you want to clear something yourself. Can I take over for a little bit?
Please.
Because what I wanted to say, was there a show of hand for people who wanted to be music supervisors?
2 or 3.
Well,
2 or 3.
My question is a bit in that direction. I'm
Yes.
just thinking, like, what would you recommend if you wanted to become a super music supervisor? Because it sounds like it's quite a job that's very specific,
Mhm.
and you have to be highly skilled, as Iceland, build up a career as a music supervisor?
Well, I can describe the situation as it is now.
Yeah.
You might know it, but there are a couple of knowledgeable people that have the production skill to get things done in Iceland. We have an island mentality. It's quite easy. You know somebody that knows somebody. They say yes or they say no. But mostly it's undervalued in the Icelandic film industry, the job of a music supervisor. Now, saying this as a composer, we don't always have a love-love relationship with music supervisors. Let's be clear on that, because we don't always agree. But everybody's trying to make the best film they can, and that's very important to remember. We're quite used to killing our babies and throwing away tracks that we would like to use, but we also do it sometimes ourselves. When we feel a scene is better without our music, we throw it away. But the legal side of this, it has to be a mix of a very creative person that loves and likes music and films. I would say that's a prerequisite. But then there is the production and legal side, which is quite complicated, which is something that can be learned if you have the interest, and it can become really valuable. I've been, for the last 12 years, for the agencies in Iceland, it's me or Guðrún they call when they want to clear something. Me to ask, how can we do this? And then they go to see who owns the rights and so on. So we get these calls quite a lot. I don't claim to be any kind of music supervisor. I respect that job far too much to claim to be that. But we help out, within our small business where everybody knows each other. Filmmakers, we as composers, usually we get married to the directors. That's our main working relationship in small indie productions, which basically covers all of Iceland. But there is such an important, one series that I'm hoping to start work on soon, happens in 3 countries. And I was actually, contrary to what he said before, the one who said, when we go to this country, which I can't name, we try to use as much local music as we can, because we have to give a certain period and we have to give the climate of that. So I could try, but that's not my strong side. I'll do all the other stuff, but let's go and find a music supervisor that knows that kind of music and then can clear it easily. So please become music supervisors and ask Jonathan all the questions, because we need more people that are knowledgeable on the production companies in Iceland. Are much in the same way. They've evolved and had to learn these things, the legal sides of things, and the ad agencies as well, because they've all run into problems. And this is a great way to learn, to be honest, but there is a better way.
Just to finish what we were talking about before, are the workshops, just please like Steph's Facebook page. And because there's there where things happen. It's there where we advertise all our events, as this one. But my idea for, to become a music supervisor, I think a good way to start is actually to contact the few big production companies in Iceland and say, hey, I am a creative person and I know how to clear the songs. Maybe, do you have any project that I could work on? You introduce yourself to the biggest production companies. There you can learn the trade, and then maybe from there you can maybe try to start your own business. Just before I give Jonathan the microphone, because talking about the rights, which is so important, I have one tip in that respect, is that because in Iceland, almost all the members of staff are self-published. That meaning they don't have any publisher. Because I don't even know if everybody here knows what a publisher is and what he does. We recently had a different workshop on publishing, but we don't have that profession in Iceland. There have never been a full-body publishing company in Iceland. That means that when there's a band and you have 5 members of a band, they all have different splits in the song. they all have to agree on sync deal, which just that, is going to make the clearance more difficult and more complicated. So a good starting point is that if you're in a band or if you have co-written a song with anyone,
Keep you right.
is that okay? Before, if you don't have a publisher, because this is one of the jobs of the publisher, that's one of the jobs he will take care of for you, is to help you clear the songs, and to get syncs and be in touch with people like Jonathan, and try to pitch some songs to him and his catalog or something probably. But is that okay? There are 5 members in a band. Just do an agreement between yourselves that one member of the band can actually sign sync agreements or the usage of the songs, in agreements with the third parties, if it's a sync or other usage, and that this one person is going to be able to sign such agreements, and obviously that person is then also has to take up on the responsibility of distributing the shares, the royalties that come in.
In that way, this one person can actually give a go-ahead when he's working with 1 hour on the mixing stage. And you can say yes. Right. So easy clearance for you music people. Make your stuff easily clearable because it helps everybody, literally everybody.
So there is a certification class you can take in the States at the Berklee College of Music in Boston. I'm not sure if you can do it online. You might be able to get the certification, the music supervision certification online. You have to double check. But you can go on the Berklee College of Music in Boston website and take a look at that. Going to either the UK or LA or New York and interning for a music supervisor or for an advertising agency in the music department, or at Universal Pictures or Warner Brothers Pictures. They all have music supervision departments. So that would be another way to go about it. And go out to LA or New York, and then you can take a class or two at either NYU or USC or UCLA while you're doing your internship. So that's also a way to really learn about it. And similar things are going on in London as well. There's a handful of music supervisors that are really sharp and try to get an internship. A lot of them are single-person operations, and they might have an assistant. There are some companies that are actually like a company with a staff, but that's far and few. More questions? Come on. All right.
I'm kind of interested in the relationship between the music supervisor and the composer, because you've mentioned it, but I was wondering, is it very divided the way you work, or do you have a say in each other's job, or how does it go usually?
Well, the hierarchy is quite clear. When we compose, the approval is not ours. We offer music. It can get denied by the music supervisor, which can come back to us and say, listen, I love this, but we need to go another way or do something else. So he becomes, I don't know if I'm describing it perfectly, but it's sort of like a filter between the production. So the production or the director or whoever or the showrunner doesn't have to listen to all my bad demos, but actually has to listen to one that makes sense, and that is good.
Yeah. Look, it's most of the time a family affair, and you have to work together as a team.
Yep.
And people will have opinions, and people will say that doesn't work. The music super will say, no, I think we should not use score here. Let's use a song. And then the composer might say, no, I can make an electronic club music beat, and don't worry about the fee. And so there can be some tension, but everyone knows it's in everyone's best interest to work together as a unit, for sure.
Absolutely.
And oftentimes it's the director's call in the end. It's oftentimes his or her sort of final decision, and they have their own vision, and we're sort of just children kind of on the ride to do our job for them.
There's also beautiful examples of music supervisors fighting for composers. So it goes both ways. It's all kinds, takes all kinds.
Yeah.
Any other questions from?
Oh, yeah.
I'm curious to know if do you collaborate with the let's say you picked a song and the director approves it, and then do you like collaborate with him how the song gets edited?
Great question. Great question. Do you want to say? Yeah.
So the question is there any collaboration when it comes to how the song gets edited for the final cut?
So in the States, and I'm not sure how it is in Iceland, but we have an actual music editor that works on the stage for the final mix.
Nobody's ever heard of that in Iceland.
And they are they're cutting to how the song will fit. And of course, they either know what the director likes and wants, but the director certainly will be there, and he'll have or he or she will have a description of, I want it to fade out here. And the music editors just know what to do. They know what works well, and they know that voiceover is usually the most important thing. And some of the tricks of the trade are amazing in some films when you'll see the music and you'll be inside, say, a house, and then they cut to outside and how the editor cuts it, so then there's a filter and it sounds like the music's outside, listening and it playing from the inside. So there's a lot of things that they do to make the audio as perfect as possible. It's
They
pretty
might
cool.
even cut to your instrumental from the vocal version, all kinds of tricks they know. But here we're just sent a QuickTime file. They said, okay, and if we have suggestions, we...
Right. And when it reaches the level of advertising for music, stems are provided. So the stems are sent in, and the editors will be cutting and playing around and doing all sorts of fun, little funky things. And film, they don't always ask for stems, but they'll take the instrumental, and unbeknownst to even us, they might loop the instrumental. And there might be something that is repeating to allow for the scene to unfold properly. And the director really wanted the song, and it feels perfect, but something comes in too quickly as far as like someone stabbing someone, and so they loop the music to extend it, and they'll play around a lot with it.
And you want them on the job because usually they'll make a tasteful job out of editing your music. Yeah. Usually.
So you could cut out a chorus or something, go straight.
Totally.
You fit it to the picture, to the story, to what's happening with whatever means they have. If they have the stems, they can even decide we're going to take out the piano. You know, this happens a lot. We send scores and to commercials and so on, and somebody muted some, in one case, a technician accidentally muted some strings I had recorded, and they forgot it until the end, and I was just like, where's my strings? Oh, we think it's perfect like this. Do you want to listen with the strings? And they listened with the strings. I like it better the other way. Okay, thank you. And that's how it works. I mean,
Yeah, it's true. It's really true.
Yeah. So while I have the microphone, this is a burning question of mine. What's the major difference between music supervision for TV, for film, for trailers, for gaming? I think gaming is a really interesting one because the gaming industry now is, so massive. And where does the music come into that?
Wow. That's a good question. I can only answer it from some of my experiences and some of my knowledge. I've never really done like a full TV show. I've done a pilot, so it's difficult, but I know that TV music supervisors, it's a lot of clearances because it's a whole season, and they work with the showrunner as opposed to the director of the episode, because the director of the episode in the TV series often changes. And the showrunner, it's their show, it's their idea, it's their concept. And so they're sort of understand the way to bring commonality to all of the episodes. I would say that video games is very, there's not all video games are using licensed music. The games that everyone knows, like Just Dance, is a really popular one that just has the latest trendy dance songs. but a lot of the video games are score driven, and there are composers that just deal with video games, and they're amazing at it, and I don't even know who they are, but they're really good at it, and they work out of like Vancouver or weird places or
Sweden. Lots from Sweden.
So it's the games that the sports games often will have music licensed in, especially like the soccer games and stuff, because they want music based on the countries. So some supers will work ads, film, and TV. Some will just do ads. Some will just do movies and TV. I don't know. I only know supers that just do video games, and a lot of supers just do ads. A lot of in-house companies exist, like in other words, Ubisoft or Sony Games has their own music supervision departments, and that's what they do. And then movies, major studios, Universal, Warner, Sony will have in-house music supervisors. And then sometimes they'll hire independent ones that will do independent work.
And they will cross-sell their own catalogs of music that they own rights to if they can.
It's yeah. Look, I'm doing it to a certain extent.
Yeah.
To be candid, some music supers also represent or own catalogs, and one way can be looked upon it as it's a conflict of interest. But in another way, you can look upon it is it's a way to save money, because the music super is going to try to work within your budget and get you music. And like I mentioned earlier, you might, as a director, just might have a generic need. It's a hip hop beat as we're driving through a low income area, and we want it to show that it's a tough street area. And you don't really need to spend money on Drake or Eminem or Kanye there. You can spend money on my catalog and only for a few $100s. And as long as we're forthcoming and we tell that to the director, usually it's not an issue. So we are...
I just wanted to add concerning the games. As Jonathan said, it's usually someone is just employed to actually to write music to a particular game. If you are some musician, if you are in that position, it's important that you try to keep your rights to the music when it's not used within the game. That could be a lot of secondary income for you, if you can be able to do that. And it's the same for the films, for low budget films, and I think Peter can tell us more about that. But just before, I had just one other point that we see more and more, even here in Iceland now, that is that the production companies, that they want part of the publishing. And that was something I wanted to touch upon. Meaning that they will want a part of your income as a musician, as a composer, the income that you would receive from your collecting society. So, and not always, it might be just, you could justify it in some cases, but definitely not all. And I'll give Peter the microphone now, he'll wrap it up.
Strong opinions here. Yeah. Well, listen, it's very simple. If you do something for Universal and they want half your publishing, you give them half your publishing, because they're going to make money out of what you made for them. It's going to come back to you tenfold. If you give it to a local production company who will never release your music or do anything for it, they're just fighting for the rights to have them because they think it's cool and they think that they can earn more money from it. So this is a fight. We have fights. We have fights with Netflix. We have fights with all kinds of stuff. But usually, and for the music people out here, you will get, if you release your own stuff, my first advice, just get it out there and let people like it and love it and discover you. You will get lots of requests for $100, $200 for usage in this YouTube video, whatever. If you don't utterly dislike what it's being used for, say yes.
Agreed. More eyeballs.
Yeah,
More eyeballs,
don't say
more ears.
it's not, because some of the smallest projects can actually make you the most money and the most clout. Where you help out in a small project that you never know what's going to become huge. So open mind, don't focus on the money. Somebody wants to pay you, somebody likes your music enough to sync it, only has this kind of money. Next time they will have more, whatever, do it if you don't hate what it's being used for.
Yeah, I would just say, quote unquote, giving up your rights, it's not always a bad thing.
No.
It depends on what you're getting for it, and it depends on if it will help you get to the next level. So you have to evaluate each of those situations individually and ask experienced people in the business and hopefully have some sort of legal representation or a lawyer or a friend of a lawyer, something to talk to know, does this make sense or not?
Or Steph.
Right, or Steph. But to get like sort of what we call like a land grab, where someone just wants rights to something but they're not going to do anything for you, then that's something you have to really think about and question. So we have to sort of close things up. I want to say thank you to everyone who attended, and thank you very much to Stockfish and all the people that were involved to put this event together.
Gave Jimmy